Hi everyone and welcome to our Children and Young Persons Rights podcast. I'm Tracy Davis, Child Health Commissioner. If you are a regular listener, you'll know that we've recorded podcasts on Article 2, non-discrimination, Article 3, the best interest of the child, Article 6, the right to life, survival and development, and today's article, which is Article 12, is about the voice of the child. These 4 articles make up the general principles of children and young people's rights and help us to think about how we should balance and apply all of these rights that children have. You can find all of the podcasts on the Learning and Development pages of Aberdeenshire's GIRFEC website. So today's a special one. We've got lots of special guests today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in a minute. But let's start by saying hello to Nikki and Nicola.
Good morning, I'm Nikki Forsyth. I'm the lead nurse for children and families.
And hi there, I'm Nicola Kenyon and I'm the Strategic Development Officer for GIRFEC, which is getting it right for every child within Aberdeenshire Council.
Nice to see you both as always. So Article 12 of the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, emphasises the right of children and young people to express their views freely in all matters affecting them, and their views must be given due weight in accordance with their age and maturity. That means that when adults are making decisions that affect children and young people, we should ask them what they think, we should take account of what they say, and we should respond accordingly. Children should be supported to give their views in a way that's best for them. I think many adults fear that to uphold Article 12, we must give children everything they ask for, otherwise we're being non-compliant. But that's not the case. It's important to demonstrate that we've heard and considered their views and that we can give a good explanation as to why a decision's been made. So it's Article 12 that we're going to discuss today, and we have a podcast with a difference. So today we have a panel of people, including some young people, who are going to help us to think about Article 12. So let's move on and do some introductions. So I'm going to ask all the panel members, can you tell us your name, your role, and a couple of sentences about what Article 12 means to you, please? And we'll start with some young people.
We're the YPOC group, and tonight we've got and
James.
and Aaliyah.
I'm Jake. I'm part of the YPOC group, and here's the rest of the YPOC group.
I'm Carla. I'm also part of the YPOC group. I'm Kathy. I'm also part of the YPOC group. I'm Brick. I'm also part from the YPOC group.
Hi, my name's Rachel McBride. I'm Specialist Nurse for Child Protection in Aberdeenshire. Article 12 means for me that ensuring that every child's voice or views are genuinely heard, respected, that they influence their decisions that affect their lives. I've got a real passion and focus for infant voice and trying to move away from the use of child too young to be heard.
And hi, my name's Laura Stewart. I'm a senior practitioner within the Children's Rights team in Aberdeenshire. We're a small team, but we work individually with children and young people involved in child protection and also who are care experienced. And we also help facilitate the YPOC group, which is a campaigning group for care experienced young people. In one word, Article 12 means everything to us in children's rights. The UNCRC guides everything we do in children's rights. And whether or not we offer direct support through advocacy and rights support or within the YPOC group, we need to remember that those going through child protection or our care experience, their lives are always full of uncertainty and change and can be really traumatic for them. So making sure that they can use and have their own agency within their own lives is really important. So Article 12, if it's been implemented, gives them this. So we work alongside them, get to know them and work out best ways with them and making sure their voice is listened to and within their care plans. So Article 12 for us in children's rights isn't just about listening, but about action so that young people have agency within their own lives.
Hello everybody, so my name is Rachel Lewis. I'm the Youth Engagement Worker for the Tackling Poverty and Inequalities team within Aberdeenshire Council. Article 12 to me means working with young people as partners. There's no undermining, there's no judgment or inequalities. We're all just kind of equal on this. It's about making sure young people know and understand what's going on in their own worlds and feeling safe to speak their truth and opinions.
Good morning, I'm Ryan Morris. I'm a detective inspector with Police Scotland. I work in a department called the Public Protection Unit, and I have responsibility for looking after the child protection portfolio in the North East, which obviously covers Aberdeenshire, and I manage the team who responds with partners to disclosures of abuse or potential abuse by children, and also manage the team who go out and speak to children and interview children when something has happen to them. I think for myself, Article 12, as my colleagues have said, means, listening to children and young people that we are working with and who form part of our inquiries. And I think a big part of the listening to them is trying to, when they ask for certain things to be done, trying to accommodate that, but we can't always do that. So really important for me is getting an explanation to a child and young person if we are doing something that they're unsure of or maybe didn't want to happen as to why that has happened. And that's really important to Police Scotland because we are a rights-based organisation, and our values of integrity, fairness, respect and commitment to upholding human rights is at the heart of everything that we do. So as others had said, just really important, and it's really important that it's integrated into everything we do on a daily basis with the young people we're working with.
Hiya, my name's Michelle Podlesny. I'm the Service Development Officer for the Promise within Aberdeenshire Children's Services. Article 12 for me in my role is about meaningfully engaging with our children and young people to truly understand what they need from children's services and how we can shape positive, meaningful change in line with their experiences, alongside their wishes and their priorities. So it's about doing things with them rather than to them, and ensuring that they're active partners in designing the services that affect their lives.
Morning everyone, I'm Stuart Grant. I'm the Active Schools and Community Sports Manager for Live Life Aberdeenshire. Active Schools as a programme is designed to support young people to live healthier lifestyles by providing more sport and physical activity opportunities for them on a daily basis. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. So Article 12 for me, that really looks at making sure that we are including young people as part of the design of the programme, making sure that their voice is heard. And a big part of what we do is also work with young people as leaders. So it's really helping them to shape how sport and physical activity is developed, both in and out of school, and how they can get involved in supporting and developing themselves as confident young leaders for the future.
Hi folks, my name's Heather Beattie. I'm the Play Service Manager at Royal Aberdeen Children's Hospital. As a qualified play specialist, it's part of my role to help children and young people navigate healthcare, treatment, procedures, have some choice, be able to have their voices heard and be involved in decisions that are relating to all of those aspects of healthcare. So I think for me, Article 12 is very much integrated in what I do on a daily basis. It's very much threaded through everything that I do and my colleagues do. But I think it's also very much a foundation of our training and is extremely important to what we do on a daily basis.
Amazing. Thank you all very much for being here today and for your introductions and for being amazing ambassadors for children and young people's rights. That came across really clearly in your introductions, which is brilliant to hear. So let's move on to some questions then. And the first question is about understanding, just our general understanding of Article 12. We're going to start by asking this question to young people first. And the question is, what do you think the difference is between adults just listening to you and actually taking your views seriously, like Article 12 says they should?
Do I feel like adults listen to me? Maybe, maybe not. I will say in the past, it was definitely worse. It's not too much better now, but in the past, I used to go to meetings as a primary school age, 5, 6, maybe 8 even. And it would just be me in front of this panel of people in front of the people who's the head of social work, and they'd ask me, they'd talk to me about my mum and that, because trying to figure out if I want to stay there. But that only happened when I was younger instead of when I was a teenager, which feels like them somewhat coercing your opinion because you're younger, you feel like you can be not manipulated, but led on because they're older, you feel like they're right, and it's difficult.
Yeah. Like when you're in your lack of use and stuff like that, and you're asked in front of your social worker, are you happy where you're staying? You don't really feel comfortable enough to say, no, I'm not comfortable with where I'm staying. I would like to leave or go somewhere else. Because you're right in front of them.
Even moving, I didn't get much opinion, even though it was like a short moving and I needed to move quickly. It would have been nice to talk through that a bit more rather than just find a place.
Yeah. I think if I was asked if I was wanting to move back with my parents when I was a teenager, I probably would have maybe changed my mind and said, yeah, I would actually like to live with one of them.
But there wasn't that choice.
No, not really. I didn't really feel like there was.
Thank you for that, and thanks Tracy for that question. It is such an important question. For me as a professional, the difference between simply listening to a young person and actually taking their views seriously comes down to what happens after they've spoken. Young people can tell when an adult is just being polite or when we've already made up our minds. Truly taking their views seriously means slowing down, being curious, and showing that we value their insight, not because they're a service user, but because they're experts in their own lives. It also means being honest. Sometimes we can act directly on what a young person says, and sometimes we can't. But either way, we owe them clear feedback about what we did with their views and why. That follow-up is what builds trust. For me, Article 12 is really about respect. It's about moving from we've heard you to your voice shapes what happens next. And when young people see their views lead into real decisions, that's when participation becomes meaningful, not tokenistic, but genuinely empowering.
Thank you all for that. But how do we know that we are listening and giving due weight? So how do we evidence it? And that's a question for Nikki, Nicola, Stuart and Michelle, if you don't mind, please.
Thanks, Tracy. Again, I think it's really important to say that listening isn't only about spoken words. In our services, there are children we work with who are pre-verbal, non-verbal, or communicate in ways that don't fit traditional conversation. Article 12 absolutely still applies to them. For us, giving due weight to their views means paying close attention to body language, affect, play, interactions, and behaviour, because these are all valid forms of communication. How a baby turns towards or away from a stimulus, how a child responds to certain people, how they engage in play, or how their behaviour changes in different environments. These are all rich clues about what they like, don't like, or feel safe with. We also use a range of communication tools to support this, visual supports, talking mats, symbols, drawings, and developmental tools that help children express choice and preference in a way that suits them. When we use these consistently, it allows children of all abilities to have a genuine say in what happens to them. And again, the evidence comes through in our practice, in our chronologies, assessments, child's plans or health documents. You should see us describing not just what was said, but what was observed and linking that to decisions. For example, the child consistently chose this activity or they showed distress when this approach was used and how that shaped the plan going forward. So for me, knowing we're giving due weight is about two things. First, that we're using every method available to understand the child's perspective, and second, that you can clearly see their voice, spoken or unspoken, reflected in the decisions, actions and supports we put in place. When that's visible, we're truly honouring Article 12 for every child.
That's a really clear view there from health, Nikki. And I guess from my perspective, for me, I think that we know we're listening and giving due weight to children and young people's views when, like you said, when children and young people can express their views in ways that work for them. So, like Nikki, you've described for infants there, we really need to take that time to stop and think and plan the best way to do this for the child or the young person. As we know, we do this very differently for each child or young person. They're unique, and so the techniques we use need to be tailored to their needs. We need to make sure that we treat children and young people's views as essential information, not optional information. I think that's really, really important in the planning process, that we get that right. And any decisions made needs to be clearly shown how and where our children and young people's input was considered in that decision-making process. And for me, the second part of that question there, Tracy, around evidence in that, I think it's really important to have good quality recording, to record how this process has been done, to ensure it's open and transparent. we need to ensure there are clear links between the children and young people's views and decisions made. We also need to look at and use our multi-agency documentation. Our documentation is a great way to evidence how we've gathered those views and what we've done with them. For example, our Getting It Right for Every Child documentation helps us to do this in formal situations, like during child planning meetings. So, for example, consistent use of the GIRFEC Getting It Right for Every Child practice model is really helpful and useful. And for me, most importantly, we need to ensure that we're completing that feedback loop that you spoke about. Both quite a few folk have spoken about that already. So after listening to our children and young people's views and ensuring their views are taken into account during decision making, we feed back those decisions and next steps with the child or young person so that our children and young people are fully part of the whole process involved in gathering and using children and young people's voice to its fullest.
Thanks, Nikki. I think from our perspective, I mean, we know that we are certainly listening or giving weight when we can start to see that the children's views are really having an impact on shaping the programmes that we're delivering. So, you know, we regularly engage with young people to look at you know, how they feel our activities are going, whether there's something that we maybe need to change, you know, if it's potentially a young person's football club or a netball club, you know, do they want to see something different? Do they want to see volleyball, multi-sports type thing coming in? So we start to listen to that with the knowledge that we do also have to make sure that we're trying to run a balanced programme. But we start to see that change, and obviously we work with a panel in most schools where we can to start getting them to help us to shape the programme. So we're really starting to get that view, and that's young people talking to young people and finding out really what they want to see happening within their schools as well. In terms of evidencing that, you know, we've got, as I say, we've got a panel, and we look for regular feedback from the young people. We do check-ins during the sessions as well, just to make sure that, you know, that things are going okay, that young people are enjoying it, asking them what might they like to see different in future. And then we also then, as I said previously, we've got a lot of young people in leadership roles, and by having those leadership roles, you know, we've got a real strong connection in with them that allows us to really record how they are influencing those decisions and programmes, and we can sort of see that tracking of a programme as it goes through as well, and the young person's journey through that. So for me, it's really around just continuing to do that engagement with them, keep checking in and showing that evolution as well. And sometimes that means that we end up going back, you know, to doing things as we were doing previously as well, but it's always with the young people in mind and with their opinions being at the forefront of that.
So for me, we know that we're listening and giving due weight when young people themselves can recognise their own influence. In my view, I think that's the strongest evidence that we can have. From an organisational perspective, though, we must be able to show really clear lines between, you know, what our young people said, what we did, and why, and it links into that feedback loop that everybody's mentioned is so important. In my role, my focus is on the promise and our care experience children and young people. And a good example of this is the Bright Spot survey, which we carried out in 2022 with our children, young people and care leavers. So this really big survey helped us understand what was important to them, what was working well and where change was needed. And we then used their feedback to shape our corporate parenting plan, ensuring that our priorities and our actions directly reflected what our young people told us mattered the most. And I think that's a really tangible way of evidencing due weight. It's also really important to understand the impact of the change, and only our young people can tell us whether what we've done has genuinely made a difference. Their feedback, whether it's positive or challenging, is really essential in showing whether our listening has been meaningful. Given my role in service development, it's really crucial that we hear from as many children and young people as possible. Not everybody's going to agree on ideas or solutions, which is why closing that loop is so important. Feeding back to young people about how their views helped shape decisions, explaining why certain choices were made, and thanking them for their time and their honesty and insight. And that transparency, I think, is part of how we demonstrate that their contributions carry real weight. And ultimately, for us, keeping the promise in Aberdeenshire means moving on from consultation to genuine partnership with our children and young people. So co-designing, evidencing change and closing that loop every single time. And in that way, we can ensure our care experienced children and young people can see, shape and trust the differences that we make together.
Thank you all very much for those responses. There's some great examples and some really great evidence that we aren't just hearing the voice of children and young people, but it is having a real impact on our work in Aberdeenshire. So really, really brilliant. Thank you. So now we're going to think about implementation and challenges. And this is a question for both the Rachels, Laura, Stuart and Heather. What needs to be in place to make sure children and young people's voices are genuinely heard and not just tokenised?
Thank you, Tracy. I think for myself, it's about explaining why their views are sought and showing how the views influence decisions and providing the feedback that we've heard so many people talk about already this morning. But using frameworks like the Lundy model helps monitor that impact and again, maintaining that transparency. And regular review and being, an independent advocacy prevents tokenism. I think participation needs to be accessible and representative for all children, including infants and non-verbal, which is obviously the focus I have. Involves using the advocacy to ensure their voice is included and providing alternative communication methods and regularly reviewing the processes to prevent that tokenism. I think a key requirement of that is skilled practitioners who listen actively and challenge bias. Training should be focused on the rights-based and trauma-informed processes and approaches, and ensuring staff can facilitate meaningful participation rather than that symbolic gesture. Practitioners must value the children's input and integrate into decision-making processes.
So for me, a few people have said this already, so it's trust in a safe space for the young people. A lot of young people are often let down, and it seems to be becoming harder for them to speak up and to have their truths and their opinions valued, and understandably so once that trust is gone. Once you've built that trust in a safe environment, then they'll start speaking openly, knowing that their opinions and voices are going to be heard. Repeating back to the young folk what they've said and showing that you've understood them, and we'll start building that trust. You go back to them after you've come up with the results and the outcomes of what they've said, thus continuing that trust building. The challenge is what we've seen so far is that everybody's in such a rush. Again, it takes a lot of time to build trust in relationships with young people. And I know a lot of organisations and decision makers didn't have that time to do that. A lot of folk are firefighting, we're jumping from one activity or one issue to the next. So it's not that we don't care, but I think it's just a lot to be processing. We're not having time to feedback, we're not having time to go back to them young people and building that and letting them know what's been done. Thus just breaking that trust again. In such a turbulent world, the young people need consistency and trust in adults in their lives.
So we at Children's Rights, we get to know children and young people really quickly, and our service is set up so that we work for and only children and young people. So that allows us to provide independent advocacy and rights support. And we try and give them as much control within the relationship as possible. We often say that you are our boss. And linking with what Rachel's just said, it's all about making time to build that relationship with them and build that trust and relationship. Investing in this relationship is really, really important for us, whether or not it's, with our direct work with individuals or with the YPOC group, where we help them develop relationships with their peers, so that they're helping share their experience with others, and all in a way that's right for them. And absolutely would agree with what Rachel was saying about providing that safe space that's right for each young person. So if we're providing direct advocacy, we're looking at and speaking to children and young people about where is that safe space. It could be at school, or we could meet afterwards and doing something that they like, doing something with an activity, and having a snack is all really important. so that they begin to feel relaxed and they can share their feelings and their views and experiences. So relationship building is important, and time and trust are really important within this, I would say. For children and young people going through child protection or who are care experience, any legal meeting for them can have life-changing consequences. So they might have to come into care, they might have to move away from their family and community, change to who they see in their lives, what school they go to. So their life can be in total upheaval. So preparing how they would like to take part in their meeting is really important. And we've got a whole range of tools to help them think about what they want to say to adults. But we need to remember as adults, these meetings are really emotionally fraught and intense. And we need to remember the power differentials in play between adults and children and young people. So preparation is hugely, hugely important in our work. And I would say that any practitioner, you know, providing advocacy with a small a for children and young people, preparation is going to be hugely important for those children and young people. But listening isn't enough. It really is action that's important. So following up, and this kind of tags on to what other people have been saying in the podcast. Following up with children and young people is really important. Did they understand the decisions? Are they happy with them? Would they like support to challenge those decisions? Children and young people really want to see how their views have had an impact on decisions, because they really want their views to influence decisions.
Thank you. From our perspective within the Active Schools team, I mean, I think it's really looking at how we've got that sort of consistent process that allows that sort of inclusive pupil voice to help design and develop the programmes that we're delivering. That, you know, it's been said previously in the podcast as well around making sure that that's also going back and explaining if there's something that we've not been able to do, because we can't do everything with the skills and budgets that we have, so there are certain activities that we just cannot deliver in certain places, and that's not going to happen. So it's important for me that we do have that process of going back, not only to show them what we have done and how that's been reflected in what they've potentially been looking or asking for us to do, but also why we've potentially not been able to do that as well. And I think particularly around our sort of senior phase, when we're talking around starting to look at working with smaller targeted groups around leadership and young ambassadors and sports leaders, I think that's where we get a much better chance to be sort of far more inclusive around that sort of, you said we did type model, and really speak to them about, this is what you've asked us to look at, this is what we're building, but it's that checking back in with them as well to say, are you happy with this? Is this what you expected it to look like? And if not, why did this happen, and what do we maybe need to change there again? So for me, it's just about building that relationship. It's the same things that have been spoken before, making sure we've got that relationship, but always making sure that we're feeding back, so that trust is there, and so that they know that our team are approachable, to certainly for them to be able to come and speak to us, tell us what we maybe need to change, and then as I say, we will go and do our best to doing that.
Thank you. I think for us in our setting to really have the children and young people being genuinely heard, it comes back to what other people have actually said as well. I'm echoing that. It's about the staff. It starts with the staff. The staff being empowered, the staff having access to the proper training. Obviously, a lot of what we're doing is at points of trauma, points of anxiety, all of these kind of things. But it needs to run right through that service from the start, from when that child first comes in the door to our service, right through to the very end. So I think it's about making sure that the staff are aware of what they're doing. And I think a lot of staff are extremely, extremely good at what they do, and often don't even realise that what they're doing does tie in with the children's rights and things like that, because they just need a little bit more knowledge around that. And it shouldn't just be, I think, a thing that's given lip service to and maybe taken out when there's a big project and let's get children's views, let's get participation, let's do this. It should run through absolutely everything we're doing, the small things as well. And I think it does, especially when we're talking about explaining medical procedures and helping children and young people make decisions and all of these things. And I think a lot of people within our setting are extremely good at doing that, but sometimes I think they still need access to better training and things. And I think sometimes up in this area of Scotland, we don't have access to that, or we don't feel we have access to that. So if there was better sharing of that training and things that were going on, I think that would be a really good step to ensure that we're starting there, to make sure that what we move on and do is being genuinely heard when we are, receiving those voices and hearing those voices. I think that would be a good starting point, certainly in our workplace anyway.
Brilliant, thank you all. So I've heard you all describe, key themes like relationships, trust, the importance of checking back in, the importance of being prepared, and also those really key elements about staff support and staff being prepared and having access to tools. And Heather, I've taken some actions away from what you just said there, but really interesting. You all found a different way to say that from the context that you're working within. So brilliant. Two more questions for the panel, and the next one is for all of the panel, and this is thinking about your role or the function of your team or your service. And do you have any examples of effective child or young person participation in decision making that you've seen in practice? And we're going to start with Ryan.
Thanks, Tracy. I guess from a police perspective, the first thing that we would acknowledge is that it is difficult. We have to recognise it's difficult for a child or young person to have the police involved in their life, and certainly in our area of work, where it tends to be that something has happened to that child or young person, whether within their own home or out with the home. But there's quite a lot of examples that we've got in Aberdeenshire of working with the young people and helping them in the decision making and things that impact on them. So I won't speak about any specific inquiries, but just more, I guess, generally in terms of what we do. So if we have an inquiry for a young person because something has happened or a risk of something happening to them, there's a lot of things that we do with them as part of that inquiry. So for example, if we have to interview that child, we will speak to that child and we will look to give them a choice as to, well, where would they like to be interviewed in terms of the place that it's done. We will, dependent again on the type of inquiry, we will speak to young people about, is there a preferred gender of the interviewers that are going to be speaking to them, especially if it's maybe a sensitive or potentially embarrassing topic that they're going to speak to about. And one of the big things for children and young people in helping with the decision making for them is listening to their views. And I know we've touched on this before around, we might not always be able to do what they want, but really just that explanation of, well, this is why we have to do it, and help to get that understanding. And one of the big things around that for children and young people is what we tell their parents. Now, we're duty bound to tell a parent or carer if something has happened to their child, but what we do and we look to do is work with that child or young person as to how we do that. And I have experience of, I can think of one young girl, it was many years ago, and it was a particularly, was a sensitive interview, and it was really nervous about what we would tell her mum afterwards. And it was a case of just that simple, well, how would you like to do it? Do you want us to do it? Would you like to be there? And do you want to do it? Do you want to do it together? So whilst that recognition of we have to tell your mum, it's like, well, how can we work with you to tell your mum? And that went some way to put in, well, I guess reducing the trauma for that young person. And I think finally for us around it is seeking the feedback afterwards from the child or young person as to how they felt it went, impact, etc., and really learning from that. And our children and young people have been integral in the design of some of our facilities across Aberdeenshire in respect to locations as to where we as to where we interview them. So that would be the main things. And I guess the final one, sorry, is just keeping them updated. Again, they might not like, and we appreciate that, might not like what we have to say. They might not like that someone has been maybe charged with an offence or maybe not charged with an offence, but it's just keeping them updated and making sure that they're fully cited on things that are going to impact, as Laura had mentioned earlier, could potentially impact on them going forward.
Hi. From our team's perspective, I think probably one of the most recent examples, which was a really fantastic thing to be part of, was around our Young Ambassadors launch this year. Young Ambassadors is a programme that we run with Sport Scotland on an annual basis, and we really look at trying to get 2 senior pupils from each of the secondary schools involved in that programme. In the past, there's been a sort of national launch, which brings all of the young ambassadors together into a central location, and I'm talking that from Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire, Moray, all the way up into the Shetland Isles for our ones. But this year, Sport Scotland had put a pause on that. We didn't want to lose the impact that having a launch programme would have, and so our team sort of started a bit of planning around, well, what could we do ourselves that would still have a significant impact for those that were coming to help them understand that the programme is something that's really good and really beneficial from them. So we sort of outlined what that might look like, identified a date that we were going to do it, but then the team went back to the young people from last year, so the young ambassadors that were part of the programme last year, and said, what was really good about that launch experience last year, and how are we going to make this really valuable for the pupils that are going to come through this year, that potentially you will still be engaging with in the schools on a regular basis. So we got their voice, we got their feedback, and actually what happened was that quite a lot of last year's young ambassadors came along and helped deliver the programme that we ran this year and the launch this year, along with some of the teachers as well, actually, that had been involved in it. So we got this really really sort of young person focused event that completely changed from what Sport Scotland would do, but in the right way. And the young people really felt that they were part of it, they really felt engaged in it. And part of that was that we then also did that sort of review part afterwards. What else could we do? So we now have a Teams channel with all this year's young ambassadors, and they're communicating with each other on a regular basis just to let them know what they are doing. So it started with almost a little bit of a disappointment from our side that this big national event wasn't going to happen, and I think actually what we moved that to, with the support of the young people and really the guidance of the young people, was something that in my eyes was better, and interesting to see. Sport Scotland did put some representation to that, and I'll be interested to see whether they go back to a national launch or whether they actually encourage more of these regionalised sort of local authority events going forward, because I think they were so impressed by just how good a job particularly the young people did within that. So for me it was fantastic, and something that I'm hoping we will continue to replicate again.
In regards to participation with the work around the promise, at the moment, one of the biggest pieces of engagement for us is our ongoing work to develop a service for young people leaving care that truly reflects what they've told us that they want and what they need. So over the past couple of years, we've reviewed and reshaped our children's homes, adapting the model and increasing how many children's homes we have, as well as co-designing a new service, which we hope to secure funding for in the very near future. Every stage of this work has been directly influenced by our care experience to young people, ensuring that their voices are central rather than peripheral to this development work. So we've been really intentional about how we engage with our young people throughout this process. And a key part of it has been working really closely with the adults that they already have strong, trusted relationships with. Most often that's their through care workers. And we know that by the time a young person reaches the point of transitioning from care, They can be completely understandably reluctant to engage with a new person or retell their story. However, they're often far more comfortable speaking with someone that they already know well, which is why working alongside their 3 care workers works really well. So by supporting these trusted relationships as a foundation, alongside a range of other engagement methods, so face-to-face focus sessions, we had one-to-one phone calls and accessible options like Microsoft Form, we ensured that everybody who wanted to contribute had a way to do so. So this kind of mixed method approach really allowed us to gather authentic, honest insight into what matters most to our care experienced young people in Aberdeenshire as they move towards independence. So ultimately the work really reflects a commitment to keeping the promise, designing services with young people, not for them, and ensuring that their lived experience helps shape the decisions that will impact their future.
Thank you, Michelle. Whilst I don't directly work with children and young people in their families in the role that I do support staff with child protection processes in Aberdeenshire. And as Nicola earlier on mentioned about the importance of recording their views, I have a real focus to support record keeping and gathering those views, but making sure it's recorded accurately. And one aspect of this is around the child protection case conferences and report writing. Ensures the decisions reflect their experience and needs, and it's not just a professional perspective. And I think to achieve this, that we often have those pre-meeting sessions, if you like, or visits that gather the views in a safe and age-appropriate way, and then they're shared during the conference, either directly from the child or through an advocate, depending on the age. But that accurate recording of that is essential. Practitioners must document the child's words faithfully, noting the context, and clearly show how their input has influenced the care plan. I think this approach promotes that meaningful participation that we've spoken about today. And I think in Aberdeenshire, we've obviously recently developed a toolkit that supports gathering the views. And I think I'd really like to see the views recorded in various ways. So perhaps even including creative drawings in these meetings more, and not just recording for infants in particular, that their voice, they're too young because they do communicate effectively. So yeah, that's where I sit with improvements. And I'm sorry, I don't have a personal experience for you today.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. In children's rights, it's our bread and butter that having participation and having effective participation in decision making. So I've kind of got lots of examples, but I'm going to focus on how children and young people's experiences had a big impact on the child protection part or service within the children's rights. So I was tasked with creating a pilot to provide advocacy and children's rights support for those children and young people within child protection. And of course, because I'm within children's rights, I went straight to children and young people with experience of child protection. So their experience really, they really co-designed how the service is now. And I don't think we would have this part of our service if it wasn't for the views and experiences put forward. I was able to kind of put forward that within the evaluation to senior management, and I think their voices are really powerful. That experiences are really powerful, and senior management listened really carefully to that. So we have within children's rights definitely got a service for child protection that's based on what children and young people want. And I think in this kind of budgetary landscape, I think we were really lucky to get half a post extra to do that work. But I think it was because how powerful those children's voices were, really. And also just want to talk about the YPOC group, that we facilitate the YPOC group, which is a reference group for care experienced young people. And they've done 5 campaigns up until now. And their most recent campaign is all about stigma. And it's been a really successful campaign. We've got almost 300 pledges from practitioners ranging from senior managers to teachers to social workers to carers. in Aberdeenshire, but also throughout Scotland, about what people are going to do to challenge stigma. So I really do think this is a really good example of collective advocacy in action, really, where service development and delivery improvements are due to listening to children and young people. And if I can just say how important it is in the individual work that we do to support children and young people, whilst it is our bread and butter to make sure that young people participate in decision making, it still takes a lot of persistence on our part and also the children and young people to be heard by practitioners and decision makers within their care plans. But a really good example that the team wanted to share was by persisting with children with a sibling's view. They wanted to stay together, and this seemed to be at odds as to what adults thought was best for them, but with persistence and really getting the views of those children, getting to know them, I get trust kind of relationships been really important, using different tools and sharing their views at their meetings and persevering with that meant that they were able to stay together. But that took a lot of persistence on the children's rights officer and also the children.
Thanks, Laura. That was so good. So with the Tackling Poverty and Inequalities team, I'm quite fortunate enough to be able to work with loads of partners across Aberdeenshire. So I've got a few examples, but I'm going to just stick to two because I know we're limited and just whiz through them. So the first one is the KYT group. So this is Contour Youth Team. This is a group of young people who are engaging in a lot of antisocial behaviour, fire starting, drugs and alcohol, just generally not getting on well at school and in the community. So through partnership work, and we got some funding to do a project with these guys and just build up some trust and just figure out how we can help them, direct them onto another path. So we worked with the school, worked with the partners, we got them together. They created the group contract, they created the project activities, obviously within reason, because we couldn't, some of the solutions and some of the ideas they had for the group were not ideal or not fitting with the UNCRC, so we had to turn that down. But they did amazing stuff like car maintenance at C&M McDonald. We had some outdoor sessions with the Benihee Ranger, Alison Sutherland. They did first aid training and defib training by the first responders. All of this was like free of charge. They did it voluntarily because they knew that they wanted to kind of like pass on some wisdom and guidance to these young folk. So we found that by giving them the power, obviously to some degree, we got to see that different positive side to them. They were believed in, they were heard and listened to. They weren't just that bad kids that everybody's seen them. It was like, actually, you can be quite cool and like, let's direct this to this side. So giving them that power empowered them to start making better changes for themselves. And now we're trying to get them to help us with the younger guys so that they can be leading with these guys, but we're not allowed to put it on Facebook because they don't want anybody to ken. But we're working on that. It's fine. That's their choice. And a year on from that project, they'll still see us in the street and say hi. So we've managed to build them lasting relationships with them, and it was ace. The second project that I want to speak about is the Huntly Youth Club and the YAFTS, the Young and Free to Speak youth group at the Bothy and Contour. So we were finding a lot of the young people moaning about the free school meals, the cost of the school day, the quality sometimes of the meals at their school. And some of them were going all day without any food because they didn't like the food or they couldn't get it with their free school meal entitlement. So by a chance meeting, I got to know the catering service manager, Ian Patterson. So we invited him to come and speak to some of our youth groups, and he was just ace. He was so cool. Firstly, he came with food, which is always a bonus with young people. So he came with some food and some snacks. He sat down at their level and was like, tell me what's going on. What's happening at school? What do you like? What do you not like? Let's see if we can make some changes. Again, obviously within reason, there's only so much he can do because of national guidelines and strict things that are in place for young folk. But he has made some positive changes. He's got some Taco Tuesdays coming up. He's got themed meals and that kind of stuff. They're trying to do some more around the school entitlement and using extra funding to get breakfast and that kind of thing. And it was all down to speaking to these young people and getting their feedback. Because at the end of the day, they're the clients for these guys. So not only did he come and have conversations with him, he came back a few months later with more snacks, helpful, and was like, okay, so this is what I've done. This is what I've not been able to do yet because of whatever and whatever. But how's it gone so far? What are you seeing in school? What else can we be doing to make it better for you guys? So that was really cool. They've been able to banter with him. They've been able to connect with him, and they're seeing him around the streets in their villages and just chatting to him. So yeah, that's really cool. So that's my 2 examples.
Thank you. Again, I'm coming from a slightly different angle, coming from the acute setting. But, you know, as adults, when we think about how hard it is for us to understand what's going on, if we've got a medical condition and how scary it is if we're in hospital, you know, I think within our workplace, we are very, very good at empowering children and young people to make decisions and to listen to them. But sometimes if you've not got the right information, that's still very hard to do. So within our service, it is our role to help children and young people understand the conditions, the procedures and the treatments at a developmentally appropriate level and help them kind of make those choices and participate in those decisions, because it's very, very interesting when, you know, we will go in and perhaps various clinicians have already explained something to that child or young person, then we'll go in, is our role, is that trusted, as we've all said, that trusted relationship that we have, and say to them, okay, so what's going on? What do you understand about this? And they haven't really understood it at all. So then we're able to go in and offer that information at that developmentally appropriate stage, listen to that child or young person, find out what their fears are, find out what they understand or they don't understand, and help them kind of get to that point where they have got all the information they need to make that decision. Then we can also help advocate within the teams to ensure that happens. And that happens a lot. And it's so heartwarming to see a child that really, or a young person that doesn't understand things, that is so scared, and you can see the fear in their eyes, you know, to actually give them that information and get them to a point where they are able to make decisions and choose between whether or not they want to have that scan, they don't want to have that scan, you know, whether or not they want to take that type of medicine, that type of medicine. We see it every day. We're very fortunate to see that every day and see the impact that makes just by giving that child or young person the opportunity to make that decisions. We have things like pre-admission visits and things where children can come prior to coming into hospital, and again we can listen to them, then we can listen to their fears, anxieties, but we can empower them to plan how their admission is going to go, which is really good. So that's another really good example of it. But there's so many good examples, and I'm extremely proud to say that. But there's still an awful lot of work to be done.
Amazing. So many great examples. Really loved hearing all of those. Thank you all very much. Moving on to the last question for our professionals panel then. And this question is, how can adults better support children and young people to be empowered to express themselves, especially when it comes to complex or sensitive topics? And this is a question for Nicola, for Rachel, for both the Rachels actually, for Michelle and for Ryan.
Thanks, Tracy. And I agree, it's been great to hear about all the fantastic practice that's happening across Aberdeenshire in working with babies, children, young people to have their views heard. A lot I haven't heard before, so it's been absolutely fantastic. So it's been great to have this opportunity. And everybody today has already talked about different methods and techniques that they have used to ensure that our babies, children and young people views are effectively gathered and represented, which has again been really interesting and useful to hear. And Rachel, you have already made mention of the multi-agency tools and guidance pack that was created and developed through our Getting It Right for Every Child partnerships. And I just really want to highlight that as a resource for practitioners. It's called Tools to Support Gathering the Views of Infants, Children and Young People, and it has accompanying guidance. Both can be found on the Aberdeenshire GIRFEC website. When you go onto the website, on the right-hand side, there's a menu, and you'll find that it's within the toolkit there. So it's very easy to find. The toolkit hosts a varied range of tools that practitioners can use to work with children and young people, and there are some tools in there for work with infants and babies as well, to help capture their views. And most of these tools have been used already in Aberdeenshire and have been recommended by staff. If you haven't already come across it, the toolkit and guidance is really, really worth checking it out to support all of our practice going forward.
Thanks, Nicola. I think for me, around infant voice, creating that safe environment for them to be able to express themselves, that adults must prioritise that. And I think that involves using that age-appropriate communication methods that we've talked about there in the toolkit can be used, but it means interpreting that as well and advocating for their needs. So I thought an example might help with what I mean from infant voice in health visiting in particular. Promoting that meaningful participation is by observing and interpreting any infant non-verbal cues through a visit. So if they're noticing distress when placed maybe in a high chair or on the floor, instead of viewing it as misbehaviour, they respond sensitively by pausing and actively and discussing that possible reasons with the parent. They can use frameworks like the Solly Hull approach, and the health visitor can explain that the baby's behaviour is communication. It supports the parent in managing their response and involves them in deciding next steps. So that approach really ensures the infant's needs are advocated for and that participation is genuine, and it also supports the parent's confidence.
So as already mentioned by quite a few of us, relationships are so important and absolutely essential to support for care experienced children and young people are the relationships with the people around them. The promise has also really been clear about this. Children grew up loved, safe and respected when the adults around them build strong, stable and enduring relationships that are not restricted by job titles or shifts or professional boundaries. So research over the last couple of years, including the Independent Care Review and subsequent studies which have been published through the Promise Scotland, have really reinforced that children are far more likely to share their views, especially on sensitive or complex topics, when they feel emotionally safe and genuinely connected to the adults that support them. So really touching on what Rachel spoke about with her groups earlier too. Trust isn't built through a single interaction, it's built through consistency, reliability, and adults showing up repeatedly in ways that feel really predictable and caring. I certainly wouldn't share my most sensitive thoughts or worries with someone that I barely know, and we really shouldn't be expecting our children and young people to do that either. So when the relationships are strong, when adults stay in children's lives through changes and transitions, and when we show that we're not going anywhere, that's when our children and young people can really start to feel empowered to express themselves. So just kind of creating that safety, the relational, emotional and practical safety is the real kind of foundation of empowerment in my view. Without it, our participation activity risks feeling a wee bit tokenistic. But with it, our young people have the confidence not only to speak, but to trust that their voice will be heard and that their voice will be respected.
Yep, it's reiterating that thing, isn't it, that building relationships, building trust in relationships with us. Through the Tackling Poverty and Inequalities team, we've got the Aberdeenshire Youth Rights Committee. So through that, we let the young people decide what they want to get involved in. It could be cost of the school day, the school meals, the UNCRC workshops, the TPI workshops. Whatever the topic or the project is, the young people are partners and they choose what they want to engage with. From there, like we said before, they get the power to change, shape and deliver what they want to do, what they want to engage in. Their confidence grows, the level of engagement grows, and before you know it, there's more confident, resilient young people raising their voices and just tackling the world.
Yeah, so I think from myself, the first bit I would say would be more of a generic bit of advice for for adults in dealing with it, and it would really just be to make sure that we're listening, and think about how you're reacting to what you're being told. It might be really sensitive, it might not be nice to hear, but our reaction as an adult, as that trusted person who a child has chosen to tell something, like Michelle was saying there, that it is really sensitive. Our reaction and our to that is really important. So yeah, listen to that, be trauma informed, act on what you're being told. And I think make sure that we're keeping that young person updated and explaining. We've touched on before that explanation as to what the next steps are. So that would be the kind of the general advice. Some of the things that we know that we are doing and works that has happened in Aberdeenshire around this is, as a multi-agency, if there is a report of something, is really making sure that we're putting the right people to speak to that child where we can. And again, it goes back to what Michelle was saying there about trusted relationships, but really making sure, we've got a lot of practitioners, especially, within our interview teams for child witnesses, who are specially trained to go out and speak to, children and young people about sensitive topics. So making sure we're getting the right person out to that young person. We've spoken already about the importance of feedback. Now, where this has allowed us as adults and professionals to help children, speak to us about those kind of complex and sensitive stuff is around the implementation of our Bairnshoes in Aberdeenshire, and you'll get more information on that in the GIRFEC website. But we really listen to children and young people about, well, what would help them, what would make them more comfortable in terms of surroundings. And going back to what Rachel said earlier on, it seems to be a common theme around food, but having kitchen facilities at these places was something that when we listen to young people about what they would want in their Bairnshoes, and we have that within our main hubs and spokes throughout Aberdeenshire. And our Child Protection Committee is doing a lot of work with, again, professionals, practitioners, people on the ground who are dealing with children and young people on a daily basis, around giving them the confidence to deal with disclosures from a young person. In that, we have an event in March for Aberdeenshire practitioners to come along to around child protection and our Bairnshoes, and there's various workshops that, again, where that's some of the themes. So yeah, just signposting, being transparent, being honest. And I think one of the things as well is that we can't forget is the parents and carers that we deal with for the child and young person, and signposting them to help them deal with, the questions and queries that young person might have. And again, within the GIRFEC website, there's so many links to things like, dealing with online abuse, queries, worries, etc. So yeah, there's plenty, I think, materials out there to help people. It's just making sure that we're raising awareness for folk and know where to find it.
Brilliant. Thank you all once again. And really important to mention parents and carers. And that's one of the things we know, that through the ambassadors, the professional ambassadors work in Aberdeenshire, that we want to specifically do a bit of work on. So how do we support parents and carers to understand children's rights, and how to support them as advocates to be able to claim their rights too. So thanks very much for mentioning that. And of course the snacks, we all like snacks, so I'm not surprised that's a recurring theme. We're going to hear now from Laura and some of our young people who want to tell us a bit more about Article 12 and what it means for them to have a voice, and the importance of having their views acted upon. And then we will move on to close the podcast.
What would make it easier or safer for kids to share their thoughts and ideas?
Okay. If adults were to have build relationships with the young people and also be there consistently, because it's good, you kind of need the trust between the adult and the young person, to make them feel heard and willing to open up. Throughout the years, you kind of just get told to get on with it, and it is what it is, and it's out of their control, and you just need to deal with that on your own.
And is that at school or
You're
home?
a big girl.
Or both?
That's what I got told.
At school?
Yeah.
If I was to change one rule in any school of anywhere, I would change the rule so that teachers and staff members can look and see around to see if there's any bullying around schools, because with our stigma campaign that we have done, we have realised that that isn't acted on. Have I ever felt listened to truly by adults? What would have made this difficult? I would say that in the past, when I went to meetings and such, adults had changed and twisted my words so that it meant something different than what I had said.
When they'll say that, they're like, I'll obviously bring something up, and then they're like, right, we'll change that, or we'll do something about it. And it's like, okay, maybe they're actually going to do something about it this time. Give it like a week or two, nothing's changed, nothing's improved, so it's like...
That just make you feel like nobody's listening to you.
I'm more listened to now that I'm in care than I was before.
Okay, and what do you think's made that difference?
I don't know, I think it's different people.
Okay, like your senior or your social worker or your parents or...
Social workers and
Okay.
Care workers.
Couple?
Yeah.
Okay.
So a slightly longer podcast today than what we've had before, but hopefully all of you listening will really take some value from it. I certainly have. I've learned loads listening to colleagues, and I'm really grateful to all of you for your participation today. Hopefully also those listening will recognise some of the work that they're doing within their own area and realise that actually I am rights respecting, I am promoting children and young people's rights, and I could maybe do this, or I could maybe do that. And the other thing is, it's really nice for our listeners to hear that there are people out there within our partnership who they can go to and ask for a bit of information or a bit of support to. So I'm really grateful to all of you for giving up your time to come along and join us in this podcast, and watch this space for the next one. Thanks very much, everyone.